So tonight over dinner, I had dinner with Richard and with Terry Simmons-Booker, who is one of our board members. I was reminiscing about growing up in Ireland and my idea of what service was. And my service back then as a young 20-something-year-old in a religious order was I had hair down to here, I drove a motorbike, and I worked with travelers, and I was working with the poor, and I was like really great in doing great service. And then you realize it's really all about you. But that's the only work that you can do in service when you're young. So it's actually okay, but it is totally about you. In contrast to that, we have these men who, when we take our second half of life spirituality, and when we think about being on a journey of illumination where a core part of that work is that you serve the underserved. You serve the poor, you're out in the communities where their brokenness reflects your brokenness. And that's what service means when we're in this part of our lives that's the second part of life. You do that service from a very different place. It's not about this great, you're like the mini Jesus walking through the world. No, you're actually, you know who you are and you know why you do what you do. So I'm very pleased to have 5 brothers who tonight are going to talk about the work that they're doing. The less I probably say at this point, the better. We're going to start with Peter Fishbowl, who's our United Kingdom convener, who's going to talk about young men's rites of passage and his work in that community.
Good evening. So this is a story that's taken a little while to develop, and it actually goes back before I got involved in the work in the first place. And I got involved because of young men. There were 2 young guys in my circle who, it seemed to me, weren't kind of making it into adult society. And I was talking to a colleague, I worked in education in those days, about that and suggesting, oh gosh, it would be really wonderful if we still had initiation rites that would help these young men get into something. And he talked about Richard Raw, who he'd heard on a speaking tour in England, and said, why don't you look him up? He's a very interesting man, he was a very good speaker, he's got books on all this kind of stuff. And so I did, and that's what got me along to my rites of passage in 2008. And actually, I'm a Quaker by background, and I was terribly suspicious of this thing that I'd got myself into, which seemed to have lots of Roman Catholics in it, and talked a lot about rituals and things like that. And I wasn't sure I was going to like it. And I was resisting very hard for the first several days. And various extraordinary things happened in front of my eyes, and I thought this was all kind of fairly ludicrous, really. This did not make sense. This did not compute to me. And then something happened on the Friday afternoon of the rites, and suddenly I was sucked inside the experience, and I'd got stuff of my own that I really needed to work out at that point. And suddenly, the opportunities that were being offered to me gave me a way of beginning to process what was for me a great deal of frustration and anger because my wife was dying. She had brain tumors, and we had just been told there was no more surgery that could be done to cut them out yet one more time, and the buggers were coming back again, and we were now on kind of the last slope. So there's a lot of stuff there for me to work with, if I dared, and the rites gave me an opportunity to do that. And it was that Friday afternoon ritual. Some of you know what that is. The rest, it's for you to find out sometime. So that's kind of the start of the thing. And talking about that with people afterwards, talking about how I made sense of those things, I wanted to go back to the 2 young men who had started me on this journey. One had taken himself off on adventures of his own using drugs and had blown his mind. The other was a dislocated young man. He's adopted, he's dyslexic, and he never kind of worked his way through all of that and wasn't helped to. And so this took me all back to this challenge of how do you help people find the challenges, the right challenges in life that's going to bring out the best in them and turn them into the best of the young man that they could be. And that got us back into conversations within the circle that I'd now become a part of, dealing with rites of passage. I'm here with Marty, who's sat here in the front, and he and I were part of a team who then developed, in fact, with a bit of help from Jim and from Stephen, who's here somewhere, who came over, some young men's rites of passage, which we've only done once so far, though we're hoping to do them again. We're expecting to do them again this year. And the crucial thing, it seemed to us, was that what we need to offer the young men, because this is kind of quite different from us older guys coming into the rites, who've got a whole backstory of our own and all kinds of experiences to draw on to make sense of. When you're doing this kind of work with younger men, you have to give them some of that root, core, visceral experience. It's not about intellect. It's about feeling stuff. And so we looked at all the obstacles and the trials that are part of the older men's rites and tried to reinvent them for young men. And so we gave the young men all kinds of things that you don't meet on the older rites. You don't daub each other in mud. You don't have a sweat lodge. You don't go swimming in the river. You don't break things. We gave them the opportunity to break things. A whole range of very physical, gutsy experiences we gave them. And set them in a framework in which the whole of the elder team shared little bits of their stories around the campfire every night, relating some of the gutsy experiences that these young men had during the day to real-life experiences that the older men had had, and wanted to help prepare these young men for when they met the big challenges of life later on, and to give them, I like this word, visceral experiences that kind of anchored things in their memory, and which maybe when they hit the real challenges of later life, they would draw back into things that were explored with them and said to them in some rites of passages that occurred early in their adulthood. So that's what we were doing. That's what we're going to try again to do this summer. We have the use of a fabulous natural site. It's a quarry that has grassed over, and we take them down into the belly of the earth, down into the quarry, and give them all these different experiences that I've just kind of hinted at. And hopefully it's meaning something to them. We can't know really at this point how much it will mean. We know who these guys are. We'll keep in touch with them, and hopefully they will give us feedback in years to come as to how we can improve on the trials that we've given them to face up to life. I had an interesting little exchange. I went to Taos Pebro on this trip earlier on, and I asked the young woman from the Red Willow tribe who was taking us round about, I think I said something about, can you tell me anything about your initiation ceremonies that you do with your young men? And she kind of looked at me and said, well, they're not really ceremonies, you know. They're trials followed by a celebration. And I hope that's what we're trying to reinvent for a few young men in Britain. Some trials, some gutsy experiences that test their mettle and give them some memorable experiences that they can draw on later in life. Marty is here, and I'm here for the rest of the weekend, and if anybody wants to talk to us, we'll be very pleased to talk to you. you've got guys here, as probably some of you know, who are doing some of the similar kind of work. I've talked to guys, I think it's from North California. There are guys from Texas who've done young men's work. And in particular, there's Joel and a whole group of men from Pennsylvania who've got their own program, which is called Crossings. And there's a particular exercise that they developed in their crossings, and they let us see all their documentation. And we nicked it because it was a jolly good exercise. And that's kind of the opening thing that we do, as they do in crossings, as we bring the young men into the experience and take them away from their homes and their mothers. And there's a very nice piece that Joel and his brothers have invented, and we thank you for that. So that's a little bit of what we're doing, and we're exploring, and we'd be very happy to explore a bit more with any of you if you want to come and talk to us about it. Thank you.
It is good to live together as brothers. It is good to live together as brothers.
Now I'd like to introduce Dennis McCain from Texas, who's been doing some phenomenal prison work in our prisons, and who is truly doing generative work like Peter. So Dennis, I'll let you tell the stories.
First, I would like to thank Damien and Jim and Belden. I don't see Belden. Belden back there. All the elders of Illuman for giving me this opportunity to speak this evening. I will get into prison ministry, the second half of life, in a few moments, but as Damien mentioned, ministry for me is no longer something that I do. It's an extension of who I am. And so I thank you for your patience to allow me to read my story, because I do have a tendency to a bit of a run-on sentence. And so I need to tell you a little bit about myself first before you understand why prison ministry is important to me. A call to service comes to each of us in many forms. Some grow out of a desire to continue a work that we're comfortable with, but just for a different group of people at no pay. In my case, the desire to work with incarcerated men evolved out of who I am. Prison ministry was first set in motion in 1973, and actually not too very far from here, close to Tucumcari, New Mexico. Also, hair down to the middle of my back. I was an angry, young 19-year-old radical hitchhiking from Phoenix to Dallas. I had with me at the time a couple weeks supply of amphetamines and barbiturates. At this point in my life, I was a functioning addict, meaning that I worked to support myself, but I used every day. My ride and I encountered a random license check out on Route 66. There's actually nothing routine or random about this check. The Highway Patrol was looking for guys just like me. It took them a little bit of time, but they finally discovered my stash. And subsequently, I was arrested, booked on a felony possession of a controlled substance, and I spent the next week in lockup. My fate was to be determined, and to this day, I have no idea as to why I was allowed to walk. Could it have possibly been an illegal search, or was it the somewhat hefty fine that my father had paid the police? But my preference in all of this is to go with divine intervention, that this was God's first move to encourage my ministry that would develop some 35 years later. I was later taken to a bus station and Greyhound back to Phoenix with no charges being filed. Fast forward 20 years, now finally clean, my priorities were my wife, my children, and my career. Throughout my parenting years, I found many ways and opportunities to volunteer. Habitat for Humanity, I painted houses, I cooked in soup kitchens, but what actually stirred something inside of me was when a coworker would talk about his work inside of prisons. What could that be like, I wondered, but wonder is all I did. No initiative was ever taken. I made my rights in spring of 2011, and afterwards I was watching a video by Richard. He mentioned a man that after his MROP had gone into a unit and was now teaching centering prayer, and his group that he was facilitating was between 250 and 300 men. My ego jumped. I've been centering practitioner for many years. I can do that. Again, a stirring, but no action was taken. As a volunteer assistant to a Dallas priest, one of my duties was to check the mail and deposit donations. A letter came in the mail one day from an offender in a prison about 100 miles from home. He had heard the priest's radio show and was requesting some books. I obliged, sent him the books, but could not throw the letter he had written me away. I moved it around my desk for some 5 months. Curiosity finally got the best of me. I picked up the phone and I called the chaplain of that unit. During my call, I asked if it was possible to visit Ken, the man that had written the letter, and without hesitation, he set up my first visit. I was to come down on a Wednesday. Wednesday was the day, or is the day, that this particular unit celebrates the Catholic Mass. Ken was a Catholic, so am I. I would come down, attend Mass, and meet Kenneth. Unfortunately, there had been an altercation a little bit earlier. Kenneth, another man, in a broomstick, and so Kenneth had been moved to a more secure area. And as it turns out, his only role, or his initial role in this, was to get me to that unit. After the Mass that I attended with 100 or so men, many of them came up to me. Conversation is free, and especially with a free world man, that they're trying to connect with a world that they have long since left. We eventually got around to talking about our spiritual experiences, practices. One of them brought up meditation. I said that I centered. They said the problem that we have is that we can't congregate. We can't come into the chapel to pray together without a volunteer or the chaplain present. So this time, my "I can do that" stuck. I asked the chaplain. He was a Catholic deacon. He understood centering prayer, so he was welcoming me to bring a practice into Southeast Texas. Southeast Texas, Bible Belt, there's not many Catholic chaplains. There's not many men willing to teach meditation. We had a small group of 5 or 6 men. The recidivism rate, the number of ex-offenders that recommit within 36 months of their release, is north of 75% in Texas. An institutionalized person, someone that makes few choices on their own because they're not allowed to make choices, struggles mightily to find any base of creativity or resourcefulness once they're released, without having any groundedness in a life other than what they've known. All they know is to go back to the life that they had. So the cycle perpetuates. I would say that, yes, these are generalities, and yes, there are exceptions to these rules. And yes, the Department of Criminal Justice does little to restore lives. One of my favorite stories of restorative justice comes during Lent, when Jesus loves the leper. He forgives him first. He loves him first. sitting with men that are unable to forgive themselves, unable to sense their fundamental goodness, and encouraging them to be open to a relationship with an unconditionally loving God is about acceptance. It's not about retaliation, not about retribution. We offer, if only for 40 minutes a week, a practice that helps suspend their relentless, habituated, self-degrading minds. Some of these men are beginning to see themselves as beloved sons. For the past 4 years, much of what I spoke about during our monthly Illuman meetings grew out of my relationships with this new circle of friends that I had found. A few of my brothers, the other men in the Dallas community, heard the call as well. And for the same reasons as all of us are joined here in this room this evening, we support one another in the hard work that needs to be done. The overwhelming, emotionally draining, heart-to-heart contact with the lepers of the 21st century. It is important to acknowledge, I think, that prison ministry is not for everyone. I believe myself to be well suited because, again, it was only providence that allowed me to walk. Noting the elements of the JOI, in each one of the phases, we're called to show up. In prison ministry, showing up is 90% of the work. Showing up to the forgotten and the marginalized is all about what we do each week. Show up and center. That's our primary practice. Show up and hold each other accountable. There's no one more serious about accountability than a man that knows his only real relationship is the one that he has with God. Show up and share. It was after Soularize last year and the council that we engaged in that I introduced or integrated council into our groups in the prisons. The move towards vulnerability has been slow, but encouraging. Show up and let go. Release to the present moment awareness. I believe that intention can take us a long way. Yes, silence and solitude in nature are a gift, but I've seen where it's not a requirement for healing. Show up and serve. What was originally an ego-driven desire to create a mammoth centering group evolved into sitting with men that held me accountable. They called me out and continued to do so on my walk. It has become clear that the message of self-forgiveness and non-judgment that I brought to these men was actually for myself. So, where does that leave me now? Well, that same stirring that occurred when I first heard about the work that now happens it's that during this work with these men, I see the great need for transitional housing, for halfway houses, and that there are so very few. For the men that are wanting to do something for themselves, there really is no, or there's very few places to go. So the still small voice that I'm hearing now is to work towards developing that place, some place that is on open acreage, that allow these men to live in community, to grow some of their own food, to craft and sell their handiwork, to live in a disciplined yet spiritual community and allow that institutionalized mind that they've lived for so many years to become the mind of Christ. Thank you for your time.
It is good. It is good to live together as brothers.
You know, it's so easy to want to respond to all of these wonderful stories of men truly, truly serving. Thank you, Dennis. And the next guy up is actually someone I'm really close to because he's from my home state of Arizona and someone I know has just an incredible heart. So Dean, I'll let you talk about your work because I know you're deeply engaged in our community.
Thank you, Damien. For me, it goes back to doing our Men's Rites of Passage back in 2007. I had the unique opportunity of two things. One of them is this awareness that comes through doing the Men's Rites of Passage and doing inner work, but I also had the opportunity that very same year to participate in a program called Just Faith, which is a social justice program which teaches Catholic principles of social teaching that I never learned in Catholic school. And so for me, it was bringing that piece together, and I'll just share with you two outcomes of that. One of them is working with veterans, and one of them is working with foster kids. In my work situation, which I'll retire here in a couple of months, I've been a firefighter in Phoenix for 30 years. And you know, when I started as a paramedic in 1985, we ran on tons of calls in downtown Phoenix and lots of homeless people. And you know, we would get oftentimes folks telling us that they were veterans, and we would kind of quiz them and just put them in disbelief. Well, fast forward, after doing the Men's Rite of Passage and the Just Faith program, learned about when I was a young kid, the rate of homelessness among Vietnam vets in particular was extremely high. Like 1 out of 5. Every homeless male we went on, I take that back. It's 1 out of 3 homeless vets when I was young. Or 1 out of 3 homeless men were veterans. And so it was really an awareness of looking at that, and I had an opportunity, and not having been a veteran, to realize we really need to educate our firefighters relative to veteran needs, and it kind of grew from there. The piece that I remember the most is when you do council work and men's work, you go deeper, right? Well, one of the phenomenal things that happened is we had a training session, did an orientation, and we had some veterans get up on stage, and there's a certain alliance between veterans and firefighters and police officers. We do things domestically to help people in bad situations, and they do the same thing in an international setting. And so these veterans got up and shared their stories, and it was absolutely transforming. And from there, everything changed. And but that was the awareness when a veteran is in crisis. What do we need to do? Well, the other piece, attending some earlier talks with Father Rohr, and it was this awareness. Ed Tix wrote a book called War on the Soul, and it was like, what about veterans' spiritual needs, and how do you move through that? And so we got involved at the Franciscan Renewal Center and started an outreach ministry as civilians, really not knowing what we're doing, and moving through that place of how do you educate civilians, how do you what are the needs of veterans, and bringing them in. How many folks in here are veterans, by the way? Air Force? Navy? Marines? Semper Fi? Coast Guard? Army? You know, next week is Veterans Day, so I salute all of you. Oh. One of the things one of the things we did at the Franciscan Renewal Center is to have these outreach efforts called Healing as Memories for Veterans, and incidentally, it's a priest that actually comes up from Australia, and Father Michael Lapsley was severely affected in the anti-apartheid movement that he was a part of in a letter bomb that blew up his hands, and he comes up and really gets veterans together, and he asks them 3 questions: what did you do? What did you not do? And what was done to you? And to me, there's a piece missing, because there are fewer and fewer men and women serving in the armed forces, and there's more and more of us on the civilian side that really are absolutely clueless about what service is about. And somehow down the road, there's got to be an ability, a sacred space, a setting where veterans can share their stories in a deep way, talk about what their experiences are. You know, we hear a lot about PTSD, and that's a traumatic thing that occurs, but another developing trend is this thing called moral injuries, and those are things that convey shame, guilt, and betrayal, and those are issues that we need to participate in as civilians, and I think that's really where the trend and the movement's going. The other piece I got involved with was dealing with foster kids, and there's a program in Tempe called Mulligan's Manor, and it's unusual as a foster care group home setting. these kids have a lot going on in the foster care system. As many of you know in social work, they've been abandoned, neglected, severely physically abused, sexually abused. What Morgan's is a little bit different and apart is it's not just straight kids, but bisexual kids, gay kids, trans kids. And for me as a firefighter, I lived as a gay man in hiding for 30 years. And so to walk with these kids and go through and talk about their experiences and really mentor them, their experiences are just horrifying. And at one point we merged our men's group in Phoenix, Brad and Jim and Henry, we went up and we did a boys to men's retreat. I don't know about you, but it's a life experience when you take a trans kid with a wounded warrior on a camping trip together. And really, you can't take this makeup bag with you. And yes, you have to dig a hole because there are no toilets here, let alone, potable water. We took these kids on a camping trip and in one evening did a sharing similar to what we do, and it was magical. It was unbelievable. And to have the wounded warriors share their story, and then these kids share their story, and then come to the realization that many of our warriors in our service to our country, something happens early on in life. Many Vietnam vets over and over and over again say, I turned from 19 to 25 overnight. And you look at their injury, or you look at their wound, or their soul wounding, and then I look at these foster kids, and it's like, it's the same injury. Different cause, same trauma. The only difference with foster kids is it happened another 5 or 10 years earlier. So you've got these two groups of individuals, and I think there's some magic there in terms of what we can do, particularly to mentor the youth and move them through some really, really difficult times in their lives. So that's a little bit of what I've been doing, Damien.
It is good, it is good to live together as brothers. It is good, it is good to live together as brothers.
And the next man up, another good Texan, is Terry Frisbee. And Terry has been with us for a long, long time, Terry, right? We've been here quite a long time. Terry is a healer by profession and a healer by soul calling. So I let you tell your story, Terry, about what you're doing in the world.
Thank you. I lead vision quests. Seems pretty heady for somebody like me to be claiming to be qualified to lead vision quests, but let me describe the way I write it up in the brochure. What is a vision quest? We rely on the ancient tradition of indigenous peoples around the globe of embarking on a 4-day fast in solitude in wild nature with the intention of receiving profound insight about themselves and the world. This is not a wilderness-based psychotherapy or emotional healing or shamanism. Our intention is to see clearly the temptation of the false self, egocentric self, and descend into the mystery of nature to shed this inauthentic identity. The concern is not with transcending ego, solving everyday personal problems, or helping anyone feel happier or better adjusted. Rather, we are committed to liberating souls via deep structural shifts that transform the ego and elicit a new freedom, ecstasy, and joy which is capable of being transmitted to other people. So, I have a lot of people to be thankful for to be able to even offer this kind of event. I call it a spiritual adventure. So my sort of CV is all related to men's work, the years I've been here. And I was thinking, as I was kind of adding up the years, I was 48 when I started this, and I would have for sure been heading for that 40 and under group. I would have been trying to sneak into that the first time I came at 48. But what I learned here, I put to work. So in 2001, I did my MOP in Ghost Ranch. I did 6 hours alone, fasting in the desert, and it changed my life. So I go home and I get to work. I led a boys at risk rites of passage the next year, 23 boys, teenagers. I was on the core team of the 2004 rites of passage in Ghost Ranch. 2005 to 2010, I was the convener of the Texas region, in which we did in 2007 our first MROP, and then I was convener in 08 and 09 as well. I've attended almost every Soularize from early on, and most significantly in 2008 when we were introduced and kind of required to read Soulcraft before we got here to Soularize. And that changed the course of everything in men's work. And now we had a toolkit for how to do the JOI. So we had firmings, we had death lodges, we had family-based initiations, and one of the tools was Vision Quest. My calling for this, for leading Vision Quest, came out of doing all the JOI work. I did all those things. And I'd always had this search for freedom. That's the overall calling in my life as I look back at it. I've always been struggling and searching and demanding freedom. So doing all this work, I received my soul name, and I accepted the life task ahead of me, the soul gift that I carry to my people. And it turned out to be as a guide to freedom. And I call it the Guide to Freedom on the Underground Railroad. I relate this to the way the black slaves escaped slavery. It took great courage, could not be done alone, and it was the only way out. And they had to be vulnerable and trust others who had taken the Underground Railroad to freedom. And that's the way I see our work. So I got to developing a delivery system for that, and out of that came the Vision Quest. And I had it confirmed over and over again in my life that I was most free and felt most alive when I was either backpacking or canoe tripping, either by myself or a small group. So I knew it would have to involve leading people into wild nature. One of the things I wanted to do is treat people that suffered from nature deficit disorder. There's such a thing. And I knew I'd always wanted to do a Vision Quest for a long, long time. So I started a conversation with our ritual elder, Stephen Gamble, about designing a Vision Quest for ourselves based on what we had done in our men's rites of passage. And perhaps if it was good enough, we'd offer it to others. And there was one other factor that I played into this. The most persistent question I've heard from men going through this work over the years is that when I go to these things and I come back transformed and my wife is going, what happened? Is there anything Illuman can do that we can do together, husband and wife? Evolve and transform together. So my wife has done the women's rites of passage. She even leads women's rites of passage. So I enlisted her to help in the Vision Quest. And she's been a part of it from the beginning. So the three of us together have developed what we call Wilderness Dance Vision Quest. We do a 28 days at-home guided preparation period. We have meaningful rituals deep connection and vulnerable sharing through council work. We have 4 days on-site, 3.5 alone, fasting in the wilderness to beseech or allow a vision. And my call has been confirmed by many people. We've now led 5 vision quests. The last one was September 30th. We had 10 people participate with very strong feedback. And now many men and women have told me they want to do one in the future. And it's important to the world because we move with transformative adventures like this. We move people through the stages of human development, as Plotkin outlines. And the world desperately needs more and more people to be modern-day visionaries and agents of cultural change. So it impacts men on the journey of illumination, most definitely. Most, but not all of the participants have been initiated men. And to me, it's just a natural progression from doing a men's rites of passage, spending 6 hours alone fasting in the wilderness, to doing affirming, where you're doing 24 hours fasting alone in the wilderness, to a vision quest, where you're doing 3.5 days fasting alone in the wilderness, and the wilderness transforms. Thanks.
It is good, it is good to live together as brothers. It is good, it is good to live together as brothers.
So, brothers, before I introduce our final speaker of the evening, Giovanni, I want to just talk a little bit about this work is not for you. It's done to you and in you so that you can be in service to the world. And these men are talking about those places of pain and brokenness for our sons, our nephews, our grandchildren, our brothers, where they're incarcerated, they're marginalized, they're poor, they're mistreated in whatever way. And that's where this work should drive us to. It really should be where it drives us to. Our final speaker, I've got many personal connections. The piece that drives me nuts, incarceration drives me absolutely nuts. It's a business. It's a business. It's a scandal. If you're not horrified, you're not alive. I'm an immigrant. I'm a white immigrant in the United States. I'm not a Syrian trying to find his way or her way to Europe. I'm not a child. And the debate in our culture, at least in America and in Europe, about migrants is just deeply disturbing to me. I've had people say to me, when they send me shit about immigrants, they say, but oh, no, not you. And you realize the terrible bias and what we call, in the corporate world, which is very nicely said, we call it unconscious bias. Really unconscious bias. So I'd like to introduce our final speaker, Giovanni, and I hope I didn't overstep in kind of putting some stuff out there. But brothers, this work should drive us into the poorest parts of the world. Giovanni.
Thank you. My name is Giovanni Perez, and I am an immigrant. I was born and raised in Guatemala, and when I was 17 years old, my parents decided to seek a better life for their family, for themselves, and they headed north to the U.S. Now, my wife and I are now U.S. citizens. We have raised 4 wonderful children of our own, and we both contribute to the betterment of the society in which we live. About a year and a half ago, the religious sisters from Nuns on the Bus came to the LA area to gather support for their efforts for comprehensive immigration reform. They invited me to bring my guitar and animate the rally. And so together with my family and some other friends, we quickly learned the American folk tunes such as If I Had a Hammer, and This Land Is My Land, This Land Is Your Land. I was deeply touched by the sisters when I noticed them, these white women. They were demonstrating their support by identifying themselves as immigrants, just as you did, Damien. And children of immigrants. They were carrying pictures of their immigrant parents, grandparents, and other ancestors. I have to be honest with you. I am not an official immigrant activist. When I was asked to share with you how I serve the immigrant community, I accepted it because I wanted to share. But then I was thinking, really? How do I serve the immigrant community? How is that possible? So I did some soul search, and I realized that in my own limited way, from my own little corner of the world, I have advocated for immigrant reform through calling my political representatives, writing letters, and becoming involved in the political arena. I have raised awareness of debunking the negative myths about immigrants and raising the consciousness of every person's dignity, rights, and responsibilities. I have fomented a sense of solidarity to prayerful reflections and discussions of the lived realities of our immigrant sisters and brothers and the abuses they often endure. I hope that I have also challenged my own immigrant brothers and sisters to feel empowered, to fight for their own rights, and to honor their responsibilities as new members of this society. In regards to the work we do for men here in Illuman, I believe that we need to be intentional about including men from different cultural and ethnical background and languages. We're trying in the LA area to incorporate a Spanish track for the next MROP, which has had a meeting and it's happening. I have been meeting with a Spanish speaking circle of men for about 5 years, and it's been a blessing for myself. And we have also conducted English to Spanish bilingual gatherings to open the door to our brothers who do not speak English. Growing up in Guatemala, I never thought that I would be in a position to serve immigrants in a strange land. Now I believe that God called me to serve my immigrant brothers and sisters by making me an immigrant. I remember, thank you, in 1986, when my mom told us we were heading up north, I said, "Mom, I don't want to go to the U.S." And she said, "No te estoy preguntando. I'm not asking you. I'm telling you, we're going." And just like that, I became an immigrant. That was in March of 1986. I remember March 9th, I gave my sister her birthday hug under a bridge somewhere in the San Diego area, or somewhere down there. Just as the nuns on the bus identified themselves as immigrants, I too needed to leave land, friends, and culture to know what it means to be an immigrant. I am convinced that God invites us to serve one another, not from positions of advantage or disadvantage, but as equals to equals. That is why God served us by becoming one of us. God also is an immigrant. Serving the immigrant community with dignity and respect is important to the world for several reasons, among which I consider the following. Number one, it grounds us in the present reality. Immigration is a human reality. It's part and parcel of what it means to be human. It has happened from the beginnings of times in every part of the world, and it will continue to happen forever. Two, it is important because it confronts us, and it confronts us with the challenge of seeing other human beings as our brothers and sisters, members of this world, which Francis has called our common home. We are pushed to face the face of those whose lot has been unfairly differently than our own. And three, it affords us the opportunity to reflect on our own fears and insecurities. One of the phrases that is often used to justify deporting 11 million people here in the U.S. is the following: they don't belong here because they are taking our jobs. What the fuck is that? Who said they're your jobs? This phrase is very telling about our own sense of entitlement, thinking that some things belong to us and are not to be shared with others. In the same venue, recently we were having lunch somewhere in a restaurant in Ventura, Mexican restaurant. We walk in and the waiters are white. And I turned to my friend and said, "That's not right. They're taking our jobs." If we claim to walk the journey of illumination, we need to look and get to know the people who live amongst us. We need to know their stories, their dreams, their struggles. Theirs are just like yours and mine. As men on this journey, we need to ask ourselves, who among the brothers is missing? Thank you.
We know these men are just representative of the larger body of work that all of you are doing in your communities, and that we hope that you continue to do, and that we hope that you continue to be blessed to do. Let's just give these guys one final round of applause for their good work.